Hi, everybody, and welcome to Quick Takes with the Diverse Learners Cooperative. My name is Mary, and today we're going to be talking about dual identified learners and some tools that we can offer for support. If you're unfamiliar with us at the DLC, we're an organization whose mission is to equip and empower teachers and leaders to serve all students. Today's goals are these. By the end of this video, our hope is that we understand more about students who are dual identified as multilingual and students with disabilities. And we want to look at tools to help us inform ourselves about ways we can support these specific students. So who are dual identified students? This is a term that often gets used without explanation. And when we talk about these students, we're referring to students who are multilingual and have an identified disability. So let's do a little true or false game to address some common thoughts about dual identified students. First, true or false? There is a lower percentage of students with disabilities that are also EL in the general population. This is false. So we know that approximately 13% of students with a disability are also multilingual. Here's a picture of how these students' disabilities are categorized. So you can see there's a lot of similarities between the general population of students with IEPs and multilingual students with IEPs. All right, up next, true or false? Special education service times trump English learner service times. So in other words, is it okay to skip multilingual services in favor of special education or vice versa? Well, no, that's false. We can't pass over any services. Students are legally obligated to receive both EL services and special education services as it's outlined in their IEP. All right, our last one, true or false? There are ways to tell if a student's classroom difficulties are due to language acquisition or due to disabilities. So this one's true. There are ways to tell, but it does require a student-by-student approach. So what's our job in all of this? This linked fact sheet here where it says what's our job is from the Department of Education that gives us a good starting point and helps us identify the key aspects of our job when it comes to serving dual identified students. What exactly are we supposed to do and where do we start? First, we want to appropriately identify students who might be dual identified. Then we want to provide students with appropriate services based on both their ILP and their IEP. We also want to equip teachers with the right questions to ask, and we want to provide meaningful access to instruction. And lastly, we want to make sure that we're communicating extremely well with families and parents. So how can we work to identify students who might be dual identified? It does start with their home language survey, which identifies them as multilingual. All throughout our time working with them, we're going to be sure that we're taking ample notes, that we're progress monitoring, and we're considering what adequate growth for ELs should be. So in Tennessee, we're going to find the guidance about their adequate growth in the state accountability documents that are on the Tennessee Department of Education website. We'll also use tools available to us to evaluate both our students and the programming that we're offering to them. So to the right, you're going to see two great tools that you can use. One's a toolkit from the US Department of Education, and I'm going to show you more about that in just a minute. The other is a reflection form from Cologne, Colorado, that would be perfect to use when looking at your programming for dual identified students as a whole. It's got lots of great questions that you can dig into. Here's an example of what you're going to find on that US Department of Education toolkit. So there's 5 pages of charts, just like this one, that can help you decipher the differences between what might be a language difference or an indicator of a possible learning disability. These tools start on page 7 and looks at different categories. There's reading, math, behavior, handwriting, spelling, and several others. Our next step is to ensure that we're providing students with appropriate services based on their ILP and their IEPs. So we have to give students their adequate minutes, and we know that we can't double dip. We can't count EL time as our minutes on our IEP and vice versa. This do and don't accommodations chart can be super useful when you're thinking about what's appropriate for your students. This is also found in that same Department of Education toolkit, and it's on page 15. Thirdly, we know that teachers are going to need support in this area. And the best way to do this is to work with them side by side with their students and help them ask the right questions. We are going to model what this looks like in a series of upcoming videos as well, where we look at case studies of specific students and talk through how we would ask questions, provide students with accommodations and services, and work with them to make their educational experience as strong as possible. Some of the questions we might ask are, what are the causes of this student's challenge? What accommodations are required for this student? And how can my lesson reflect those accommodations? What are some barriers to success that specific students are likely to encounter in this lesson? And how can I provide support to address these barriers? Probably one of the biggest considerations for our dual identified students is to ensure that we provide them with meaningful access to instruction. So we want to think beyond providing just translated assignments as the main means of accessibility. Instead, we want to design our lessons to bake in access points from the start. We'll use the principles of universal design for learning to support this process. UDL challenges us to provide multiple ways for students to access learning, express their learning, and engage in the process of learning. There's a myriad of strategies that we can apply within each of these aspects, and they're going to be necessary for some students, but truly will be beneficial for all the students in your classroom and in your school to create a more inclusive opportunity to access that specific content. This is what the law means by free and appropriate. Lesson access is more than just logging on to Zoom. It's a real engagement or showing up to class. It's a real engagement and appropriately ambitious for students to help them meet their goals. So here's an example of how we could do that. This is one way that you could begin to design a lesson with accessibility in mind. The key here is to increase opportunities and increase the variety of those opportunities, then provide frequent and targeted feedback that builds on student knowledge. So if we have an assignment in English as our goal, some of the barriers might be that you have students that have limited literacy in their first language. They might have limited access to some of the English vocabulary, or they might lack background knowledge. So we could provide some strategies like using their home language. We could allow students to record their response. They could write their response. We could pair things with visuals. And we're going to provide frequent and targeted feedback that builds on student knowledge. Our final consideration is to really focus on our communication with families. We know there's challenges to this communication, no matter what, there always are. So it can be helpful to think through what families are facing right now. So these are some of the issues and concerns that we might be seeing. Because of all of these issues, we want to think about how we can respond. So if students are balancing multiple challenges, we want to be ready to listen to these families. If we're unclear on what students' educational services should look like, then for our families, we want to be super clear and concise. We might see that families are unable to support student schooling due to literacy or language barriers. And if that's the case, we're going to translate and support literacy and language. We might find some families are struggling financially, emotionally, or physically due to the current pandemic or other factors. So because of that, we're going to provide them with relevant resources. If our families are nervous about school and school personnel due to their past experiences, we're going to be safe and welcoming and go above and beyond to show that to them. Some families may be unable to provide students with a private, quiet place to learn. And so because of that, we're going to be solution seeking. We're not going to just identify the problem, but we're going to look for a solution. Some families may be looking for information and answers, but they don't know where to find them. So we're going to meet families exactly where they are. We also might have families that are wanting schools to tell them what they need to know. And so because of that, we're going to be forward thinking. Lastly, we might have them overwhelmed by options, information, and resources. We've all been there. And so what we're going to do is be selective in what we share and really make sure that we're providing them with things that make the most sense for them. One of the tools that we've created is a script for phone calls to families. You're going to find this useful if you're introducing yourself to the families that you support. And on the left, you're going to see a tip and tool sheet for effective communication with families. And it talks about multilingual families and families of students with disabilities. So again, all these slides are going to be shared and the links are included on the pictures. So if you go to the caption of this video, click on the slide deck, you can click on all the links and images in this deck to find the resources. With these 5 areas for focus, you're going to be setting yourself, your team, and your students up for success and better serving your diverse learners. Thank you for joining us today. If you ever have questions, you can always reach me at mary@diverselearnerscoop.com. Please be sure to check out our website to see some of our upcoming offerings, including our new fall intensive.